One of the things that I dislike most in marketing or in any field, to be frank, is industry-specific knowledge and language that's kind of used to make it feel more secretive and more mystical than it really is. And I think customer cohorts and cohort marketing and those types of things are one of them. I am always the person who I take a lot of pride in not knowing what things are and just feeling comfortable enough to ask the question. So I was on a thread with marketing friends recently. I was like, tell me about what OOH and ACL and MCL are, because I don't know these acronyms. Folks are like, oh, this is out of home advertising and all that kind of stuff. All right. So Amanda mentioned it, but you're welcome to take screenshots and clips and all that kind of stuff. You can use the hashtag SparkToro hours if you're posting to LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram, I suppose. And with that, let's kick off. So cohort-based marketing is essentially, as Jeff nicely pointed out in the comments, a fancy way of saying groups, right? Different groups of people. And the reason that marketing differently, both on your own website and externally in whatever forms of marketing you're doing, works so well is because different people behave differently, but similar groups often behave similarly. They have similar motivations, similar patterns of usage, similar sources of influence, similar self-descriptions and self-ideation. So let's imagine that you are marketing the Nintendo Switch, the video game console, which I'm a big fan of. I think it's a great device. And you do a bunch of, extensive testing, and you get all this research from your research department, and you and the Nintendo Corporation find that people desire and buy the Switch for three primary reasons, right? There's three big motivators out there. And that is, I love the ability to dock and undock the console, right? I saw that function in a commercial, or I heard about it. I watched a friend do it, and I thought that is amazing, right? Geraldine wants to watch a show. I take my Nintendo Switch that I was playing and I pick it up and I sit on the couch next to her. And now we're, having together time and kind of our alone media enjoyment time, even if it's not the same media, which is pretty great. Portability, comfort, quality of mobile gaming experience. People who fly a lot, people who take trains, people who are in the backseat of cars, people who want essentially what was the old Game Boy or the mobile gaming experience of your phone, but they'd prefer to have a much more powerful device that can run high quality games. And three, there's people who buy the Switch, despite the fact that the hardware, is not quite as, sophisticated, advanced, can't render the 3D games quite as well as an Xbox or a PlayStation or the super modern ones, but it has Breath of the Wild, and it has Mario Kart, and it has What the Golf. Actually, I think What the Golf is on a bunch of systems, but right, the Nintendo Switch has a lot of games that are available nowhere else, Nintendo exclusives, if you will. And for fans of that is a big motivating buyer. And so if you look into research around these sorts of motivations, right, you might discover that these three groups of people make up a significant portion of your customer set. And those three are mid to high income parents with kids, right? Basically, these are parents who can afford the game system with relatively low stress. It's, I don't know what it is, $300, $400, something like that. Young adults who buy it for themselves and primarily consider themselves casual or social gamers. And third are sort of the adults, 31 to 55, who love Nintendo, right? They have a positive, nostalgic association with the brand, with the system, the characters, the games, etc. So probably what you are going to do is not this. You are not going to try and sell all of the features, functionality, motivations to all of the people in the same way at the same time, right? Because it's difficult to convey that information. The message doesn't break through as clearly. It's going to be a very challenging job, whether your marketing is, via PR and coverage, or whether it is via, an interview with the Switch's designer, or maybe it's an advertisement that you're running. It could be a text ad, it could be video, it could be just a commercial on TV, right? You are not going to try and hit all the notes for all the groups in the same way, because you recognize that that is an impossible task, and whatever you do will be watered down. So what do these companies do in order to get it right? This is actually a pretty interesting article for those of you who might be interested in how some of these big consumer plays work. This is a platform or a media source, Hardcore Gamer is, that historically has had nothing to do with Nintendo, right? Basically, people who consider themselves hardcore gamers, the Nintendo system family of games and systems have never been a big part of their repertoire. They just, for whatever reason, they like Xboxes and 3D shooters and more challenging games and more hardcore games, right? And what's very interesting is that even they believe that Nintendo's marketing has gotten it right by pitching the system in the right way to exactly these kinds of audiences, even their demographics, psychographics, buyer motivations. So you can imagine this working pretty well, but the two ways that I showed off here, right, essentially buyer motivation and then essentially demographics, right, parents versus young adults versus, nostalgic older adults, these are not the only ways to segment. There are a lot of different ways. These 7 are some of the most common in digital marketing world. I won't try and get into consumer marketing land, but I'm going to give these to you in order from my personal favorite, things that have worked well for me in my career that I like and that I've seen be effective. This is not to cast aspersions against those of you who might separate groups of people into different cohorts, or you might look at the bottom of my list and go, but that's my favorite one. It's fine. That's great. If it works for you, don't let me yuck your yum. But the first one, the one that I like best, is motivation. Asking the question, what is this potential customer trying to solve? What is their problem? And what are they looking for in a solution? I believe that is the most effective one, because if you can get to it and separate out those messages, you can show them the right testimonials. You can show them the right sort of features. You can show them the problem framed in the way that they have framed it in their own mind. Speaking the language of customers, hugely valuable. Anyone who's ever done keyword research knows this. Second one that I love, behaviors. And in fact, Amanda mentioned this one while we were building this deck. So maybe she knows a lot more about cohort marketing than she claims. So behaviors is essentially observable actions. I'll be honest, there are some observable actions that I think go too far. I'll talk about that in a sec, but I am not a huge fan of, for example, saying anyone who's hit the pricing page or anyone who hit this particular page on our site, we're going to put them into a different bucket because we think that now that they've visited that page, they've consumed the information there. I think that's a dangerous game to play. But I love anything that has data appended to a user sign up, right? So if someone comes to your site and they register, they sign up for an email newsletter, they sign up to get discounts on your, Moroccan spices. I just bought some spices for Geraldine. That's fantastic, right? That kind of stuff, appending that information, like this person has purchased these things in the past. This person has given me their email address and they said what kind of company they work at. That kind of stuff I love. Self-concept. So this is essentially, how do they think of themselves? You can often get this information if you have a B2C type of site or a consumery site where you have profiles, public profiles. And so you have that like line of text or bio, but job title or role or description of their work can do good things for you as well, especially in B2B. Role and title, media consumption. Role and title is just very simple and straightforward. Many folks get this, by the way, without having to ask. And I think this is pretty smart. It's expensive, but you can use full contact or
Clearbit or LeadFuse to take an email list. So say people who've subscribed to an email newsletter or purchased from you before. If you have the email addresses, you can plug them into those systems and they will get you back the LinkedIn profile for a large percentage, not everyone, obviously, but then you can get those sorts of data pieces out of there. Media consumption. What do they read, listen to, follow, watch? This is a very good self-sorting bucket. I have it relatively low down on the list, but I still do like it quite a bit. And I think it works because you know that Hardcore Gamer is a different publication than, say, I don't know, the old Nintendo Power magazine or what's a popular GameSpot, right? Like their media publication or whatever it is, right? Something that is very mass market versus something that's quite niche versus something that's Nintendo centric. Those media sources are different. Financial status. I know there's a lot of people who like doing this, especially on the, inside of Facebook's platform, for example. You can do advertising like this. It essentially tries to connect up email addresses and names to credit card data, right? Facebook interfaces with banks and credit reporting systems. This is expensive to do if you're trying to build it yourself, but expensive, like millions of dollars to connect with, Equifax or whoever it is, and then append financial status data, or try and do it in the B2B world, which is much easier. Generally speaking, you can ask about number of employees, or you can ask just for company name and then match that up to public company databases, which will often have estimates of revenue. Crunchbase has been trying to do this for a long time, all that. And then personal demographics, kind of my least favorite, very, very popular in big business B2C, right? Where essentially it's age, gender, ethnicity, sometimes the region where they live, sometimes things like religion. I don't love this at all because I find that it is reductive and the potential for stereotyping and bias is very strong. I understand that if you're a giant corporation selling to millions or tens of millions of people, if you're Coke, these signifiers work better for you. If you're Nintendo, even age and gender probably makes some sense. But I think in most of the SMB world, even all the way up to what we consider challenger brands and many enterprises, it's not ideal. Not ideal. All right. So you have a bunch of ways of separating, right, your audience into groups. And what I'm going to talk through is trying to get behind their behaviors and then what you can actually do to do different marketing to these different types of folks. It may sound complicated. It's not that complicated. Like there's only 3 of us and we managed to do a good bit of it. I'll show you some examples. Once you have your groups, you will want to try and uncover those behaviors and motivations so that you can do better marketing to different groups, right? Better marketing on different landing pages, better marketing in different ads, better marketing in different sources of influence, and your pitches, your messaging, your testimonials, whatever it is that you are doing, you will want to customize these based on not only which segment you've got, but also the motivations and behaviors. So this is how I do it. This is not the only way to do it. There are lots of processes out there, but it's sort of an iterative. You interview a few people who you suspect are right customers. Maybe they've already purchased from you, or maybe, if you haven't started your company yet. I did this a bunch with SparkToro, right? Like before Casey and I even had a product, some of you even on this call, I sat down with your agencies or, had a video interview with you when I flew to your city. We had lunch together, right? And just talked about, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve. How do you solve this today? Tell me about your struggle with it. And then from those interviews, I would take away here's things that I think I learned. And now here's things I want to validate at scale from a broad group of people who have similar attributes to the folks that I've spoken to. So I'm going to run a survey. And there's a number of ways to do that. But, when I did this, I think we ran 3 big, large scale surveys about, essentially influence and marketing through sources of influence and audience research and market research and all that kind of stuff. And we got, around 500 to 1,000 replies to each of these 3 big surveys. 2 of them I actually used to pitch our investors, right? The people who ended up investing in SparkToro were all like individual independent investors, no venture. And then I interview again, which might seem odd. Like, okay, you interviewed some people, then you built a survey off that, and then you're going back and interviewing some people again. I'm interviewing a few folks from each distinct group that that we identified in the survey process, right? So essentially the survey process created these automatic segments for us. Oh, here's a bunch of people who said, I'm a solo consultant. Here's someone who said, I'm a founder at a small company. Here's someone who said, I'm the only marketer in my small business. Here's someone who said, I work at an agency with 5 to 50 people. Whatever those segments are, I wanted to figure out which ones of those folks had the most painful problem and how did they describe the problem differently from other people. That's how you get it, like the core of messaging differently and effectively to each individual group. And then you're applying the lessons, right? You're taking what you learned and putting it in your on-site and off-site marketing. So, with interviews, those first interviews, you're trying to give depth and color and a personal connection that passive data can't capture. And oftentimes in those conversations, I learned things that I then surveyed for that if I hadn't had those interviews, I would not have been able to include in my survey. And in that second process of second round of interviews, I was learning more about the messaging and language and why people were having the problems and getting what I'd call like a human deep sense for it rather than just a statistical analysis sort of sense. I do love running surveys. I have I think we've got an example of the survey we ran on the SparkToro site. I'll try and find that link, but my favorite tool, at least the one that's been most effective for me. So I've used Google Forms, obviously, and I've also used SurveyMonkey a lot in my career. I found that Typeform gives me about 20 to 25% higher completion rate when I use it. And that I believe that is because it looks nicer and the UI and UX are friendlier and easier to go through, especially on mobile devices than the other two. So your mileage might vary. You might find that it works fine to use whatever, free Google Forms or whatnot, but I found Typeform to be pretty darn great. When you are analyzing actual user behaviors, right, and trying to take the data from theory to practice, right, and you're looking on your site to try and build those segments, figure out which different groups you want. My suggestion is that you focus on people where you have some sort of an email capture, rather than trying to assign it to anonymous users who simply visited something. This is partially because cookies are, going away. I realize that Google Chrome has said they're going to give us another 2 years of cookies and whatever, but I don't find it super reliable. I think multi-device throws a ton of that out there. I realize there's people who are like, oh, I can figure out based on IP address and, blah, 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 and append that data. Okay. I mean, look, if you're doing it at that scale, you're probably at a more sophisticated level than most of the stuff I'm talking about here. But I find using it for logged in people or people where you've captured an email address much better. And I would suggest capturing a small number of actions. I think you can way, way overdo it. I have seen a lot of marketing attempts. At Moz, there was a huge attempt to overfit, capture every piece of data and then try and correlate every single thing with lifetime value of customer and figure all that out. And it was like an 18-month project that I think at the end ended up having no real impact other than sort of tons and tons of busy work for a bunch of engineers and marketers and data science people who are
are very smart and their time could have been far better spent. And then C, I would try to use the behaviors and attributes that you're capturing, right? So we ask people to sign up for this, whatever, with their email. Once you sign up with an email, now you're in group, A, and then, oh, okay, you filled out this thing and you answered one of these multiple choice questions. Great. You go into B, C, or D. Oh, terrific. You downloaded this PDF, right? And you had to fill out some stuff to get that. Okay, you go into this group. Or you've run a search query inside SparkToro. Okay, you go into this group. And I try and look for ones, right? There's lots of different options here. There's tons of ways to do this. I try and look for ones that do one of two things. One, create value for your customer. So if they have purchased the Nintendo Switch and signed up and downloaded their first game from the Nintendo online store, that is value for the customer and value for the business, right? It's both groups. If they've gone in and they have played a free game online, that's value for the customer, but not necessarily value for the business. But that's okay, right? You've captured something. I think it's great to go back there. Some folks who are doing this really well. I got one example on the B2C side, one example on the B2B side. So Hotjar over here, when you sign up for a Hotjar account, which Casey and I used Hotjar when we were doing a bunch of our conversion rate optimization testing, you might have gotten some pop-ups from them in SparkToro. You can see they're asking about role, which is great. Will you use this account to manage clients? This is a very smart way to ask a challenging question around: are you a consultant or an agency or an independent consultant, or do you have clients at all? That kind of thing. And you can see all that value, right? Organization name, they could do, all that financial data or size data based on that, et cetera. So smart, useful, right? These are the ones that I might ask. You could use Hotjar, absolutely, capture this data, use that for your segmentation. You can build it right into your process. Casey just built a SparkToro sign-up process where when you enter your email address, it asks a couple of questions. They're very short, simple, and they're useful to us, right? They're useful for, hey, okay, we know that this person manages clients and works in an agency, so they're going to be more interested in these kinds of things inside SparkToro. Then this is, for example, why one of our first office hours, I think that was 4 weeks ago, we did one on using SparkToro for agencies and consultants. Right? There you go. In this case, on the right here, this is Hinge. It's a dating app. It's, what do I want to say? It's a little less designed to be less transactional than Tinder. I think they're big. One of the big things that I really like in Hinge's marketing is we want you to eventually delete our app, right? To not need us anymore. You're going to use Hinge to find a long-term partner, and then you won't need us anymore. Really interesting pitch there. Value for the user and for the app, right? You complete your profile. So you do this thing, which will create some value for us, Hinge, because we'll know more about you, and we can do segmentation, and we can do smart things in our algorithm with you, and we can send you smart marketing, and you'll be able to start liking other profiles inside the system, right? And then you can see that breakdown in there. Nicely done, very, very nicely done. There's if you search for the Hinge onboarding UI, you can see a full analysis of their system, and it was very, very successful for them. Okay, so let's talk about, you've got your cohorts. You've established all these. What are we learning here, right? What are we doing? Well, this is actually Amanda's work right here on the left. We basically at SparkToro took the information that we could, which is super simple, right? It's a few questions that you answer when you sign up for the free account of SparkToro. And we tried to identify the most salient, the most resonant motivations in customer segments in our audience, and then build systems to collect that data so that we could, segment folks and say, oh, okay, this is an agency and consultant person and someone who's managing clients. This is someone in a larger company, smaller company. This is someone who's primarily interested in SparkToro because they want to do reporting, versus this person who's like building personas, versus this person who's doing digital PR and outreach, versus this person who's optimizing their ads, right? And this is how we learn to customize our marketing. Yes, built in Figma by Amanda. And then, right, third is we create different flows of behavior. And that's exactly what this is showing, right? So the new flow inside SparkToro that Casey's been working on with Amanda is essentially, you get this first email, but it goes one of two ways. You either get 1A or 1B. And depending on whether you perform that first search, you'll skip straight to step 3 because you've already started searching. But if you haven't searched yet, then we will do, the step 2 thing, try and get you to, check out the product and learn more about it, give people nudges. It's all this kind of stuff. And this type of a system, it might sound complex to build, but it is really not. If you can figure those out, even if you just have two different segments. Segment 1, half my customers. Segment 2, the other half of my customers, or 70% here, 30% here, whatever it is. And you can do some different email onboarding, some different messaging in the app, in your e-commerce store, in whatever you're doing, to speak to them the way that they talk about their problem and your solution. You can see remarkable efforts. So obviously, this is a SparkToro webinar, so I thought I'd show some of the applications that you can do with SparkToro for this. It is not all of them. In fact, most of the stuff that happens on your website, SparkToro can't help with. But when it comes to the audience research and understanding the groups of people who make up, buyers of Nintendo Switch, or users of Hotjar, or people who talk about dating apps online, SparkToro can help with those kinds of things. There's a few different ways, right? You can search SparkToro in a bunch of ways. One is by job role and title, or any word that appears in the profile. That one is particularly handy here. You can search by people who follow a particular source of influence, so you can get a good sense for what's different between this group of people, this group of people who read this media versus this group of people who follow this other media. And I still would recommend, despite all the data that you can get at scale passively from SparkToro, that you interview and survey these folks, right? For your particular purposes, it's going to be useful. But it's absolutely the case that even the free version of SparkToro can help you learn a bunch about an audience before you go and do that. It's great for helping with, essentially identifying 4 different segments. Topics of interest, right? The hashtags they use, frequently used words and phrases, content they're consuming. It's great for finding sources of influence. What are nutritionists paying attention to? Where? How are they different? It's great for a bunch of different demographics. Gender and age are the 2 most obvious ones, but it's got job titles and roles, skills and interests, which obviously comes from LinkedIn, and that data, LinkedIn and Facebook, and that data is pretty terrific. And then self-reported descriptors, right? How people talk about themselves. This one I actually find incredibly useful because many times when I search, I think I know what nutritionists are. And then I look in here and go, oh, right, personal trainer. Personal trainer is totally someone who is interested in nutrition. I would have already thought of in my head dietitians and nutritionists, and yes, holistic and registered, sure, all of that stuff. I would not have thought of personal trainer. And so it can identify some of those words and phrases, job roles and titles that have high correlation with the topics that you're interested in, but potentially might have missed. You can obviously apply this data to your process in a bunch of ways, but I'll show off a few of them. Figuring out which sources of influence to reach different audience targets through and how to market to them differently, right? If you identify that this group of my audience is following this media source and this other one is following this other one, great, I can speak to those 2 differently. I'm going to give a different webinar presentation to, I think next week I'm doing like a show for a group of private agency owners.
very different from, hey, I'm giving a talk for cybersecurity marketing specialists who are almost all going to be in-house in a few weeks here. You can research, learn from, even interview those influential sources. I actually like doing this a lot. Look, I'm not saying that the influential sources, right, people with like big followings or people who run media publications or who have powerful podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever it is, I'm not saying that they are necessarily your customers, but I am saying that very frequently they know their audiences. They understand those problems and can describe them in interesting ways. Having those conversations, getting to know those folks in your research, super useful. I have found that a lot of sectors, more and more sectors, are becoming influence driven, right? As in, there are not a small number, but a few dozen to a few hundred people who run publications or are, run influential and powerful social accounts, and they dictate a lot of the conversation and trend in their field. My old field, SEO, is incredibly influence driven. If there's a new tool that is getting hot, it's probably because about 100 people are talking about it and using it. And that's really all you need to reach nearly the entire field of SEO practitioners, because almost all of them are connected directly or indirectly to approximately those 100, maybe it's a couple hundred people. There you go. You, like I mentioned, might uncover descriptors or motivations or titles or roles or topics that you wouldn't have otherwise considered just by looking in that SparkToro, specifically the text insights tab data. You can compare sizes and behaviors of audiences before you go target them. So if you see, a lot of them are using this hashtag and they're doing this and they're following this source of influence and they have these demographics and this is a much more, whatever it is, this is a much more female audience. This is a much more gender non-binary audience. This is a much older audience. This is a much more highly educated audience, whatever it is. They almost all have skills and interests around this particular field. Great. And then you can use the intelligence in there to do better data capture in your onboarding. So those questions that the multiple choice questions that I showed off, that like Hotjar asks or Hinge asks or SparkToro asks, you can build better ones of those because already, statistically speaking, what are those elements likely to be? You can also, if you're looking to do those surveys and interviews, these are good sources. The sources of influence for your audience are good sources of amplification. And in fact, one of my earliest use cases for SparkToro was figuring out what market researchers paid attention to, and then asking some people specifically with their Twitter account and their LinkedIn account to amplify our survey. It worked okay, actually, on LinkedIn. I got more market researchers. Interesting enough, by the way, one of the things that we learned, market researchers, people who call themselves market researchers, they don't really like SparkToro, because market research, for whatever reason, has come to mean surveys and not passively collected data from social platforms at scale. I don't know why, but this is one of the reasons that we did not describe ourselves as market research tool. We called ourselves audience research. And then possibly my favorite one, I saved the best for last. When the highest paid person in the room or on the Zoom call tells you, I go golfing every Sunday with our customers. I can tell you exactly who they are. And then you go, okay, boss, here's the actual data. What can I say? I love proving people wrong. Yeah, get out of here with that bad data. Those stereotypes. Okay, a quick sneak peek and then a request, and then we'll jump into Q&A for our last 15 minutes here. So I think it is my opinion personally that if you're using SparkToro and you're building a bunch of cohorts, right now it's a pain in the butt to have audience 1, audience 2, audience 3, and then you export them all to Excel, and then you might build your own multi-audience report inside PowerPoint or something like that. I think a lot of people don't even do it because it is kind of a pain, even though there's a ton of value in specifically looking at, nutritionist, dietitian, personal trainer. So I pitched this to Casey and Amanda, and you tell me what you think. If you think it's a terrible idea, great. If you think you would use this and it's super valuable. So my thinking was, you can go to SparkToro and run several reports. I want people who frequently talk about nutrition. I want people who use the word in their profile, nutritionist. I want people who use the hashtag #nutrition. And I want people who use the word in their profile, dietitian. And I want to see all 4 of those and the sources of influence, podcasts, social accounts, hashtags they use, text. I want to see the most in common ones and the most unique ones in one report. So I think there's a bunch of value in analyzing these all together in something like this, right? So here's all 4 of them together. You can see I've got the 4 columns, talks about nutrition, uses in profile nutritionist, uses hashtag #nutrition, uses in profile dietitian. These could be like your 4 or 3 or 6 segments or whatever it is. And then you can see, oh, sweet, maybe this is, can you see my mouse cursor? Yeah, right. So talks about nutrition. This has the highest total. Eat Right has the second highest total, even though it's not actually that, it doesn't hit the hashtag nutrition crowd as much, right? And so you could have your separate job titles or roles. You could have like broader and smaller audiences. I also think we should have a little toggle for a heat map here so that you would like get the, have you seen the green and reds, right? Where it sort of like makes it color pop to show you which ones are heaviest, have the highest density. I think that overlap is useful. If you think so too, if you would find value in this, then, oh my God, is it a pain to build this in Excel? I tried building it in Excel for this purpose, and then I could not figure out the compare across sheets function, blah, blah, blah. So I literally just copied and pasted all the data myself. But if you're doing this today, or you think it would be super valuable and you're up for a couple of emails about it, maybe chatting, with someone, one of the 3 of us, taking a look at the wireframes, all that, will you do me a favor and just shoot an email to Amanda and say, hey, I'm happy to chat with you about multi-audience reports. If you think this is useful and interesting, Casey and Amanda and I are trying to figure out, what's the most valuable thing and what's the best way to do it. That's my email. Amanda, I sent you this presentation, with almost 14 hours to look at it. Thank you, Amanda, by the way, for taking on the task of managing this. And yeah, hopefully some of you will find that valuable. The recording will be available just like it always is from Crowdcast right after this presentation is done. And with that, Amanda and I can take some Q&A.